So here is everything that I use while making sourdough. First, you need your starter. A starter is just made of flour and water that has sat and grown so that the yeast in the flour becomes active. So just flour and water. And the bread that you make is flour and water and salt, and those are the only ingredients. So here's what we have. When I'm just feeding my starters, I like to use just normal glasses, since that just helps me with the smaller quantities. When I am feeding the starter for the purpose of making the bread, I will use a larger jar. I really like the wide mouth jars that are flat because I just find them really easy to work with and easy to clean. I like using a scale because it helps me stay accurate with my measurements. I use non-chlorinated water. It's important that the water doesn't have any chemicals in it, and that it's filtered so that your yeast stays active. So if there's any kind of chemicals in there, they will kill the yeast. Salt. These are just kind of lids or covers that you can put on your jars. So you can use a cloth one or a non-cloth one. And then just any salt, and I'll use a little container to hold my salt, usually one of these two things. This is rice flour, and I keep it in a small little container. People will use this to keep the dough from sticking to surfaces when you're working with it. These are tools that I use just as I'm working with the dough. Bread flour is what you're using for your starter. It is important that it is, okay, I just realized that I just got this bag and it's bleached. So it's actually really important. This is supposed to be unbleached because bleach is supposed to kill the yeast that is in your dough. So I just baked a bread with this today. I baked a bread and it seemed fine, and my starter seems active. But anyway, you should get unbleached, and I gotta learn a little bit more about that. But I keep a little bit in a container also for my just basic daily feedings. This will be important for tomorrow, so this is what I'll work with my dough. This is called a banneton. That will be my cold proofing. This is just a silicone mat for when I'm baking in my Dutch oven. It's important that whatever you're baking in has a lid, and then of course like a cutting board. And this was my dough with the bleached flour that I made this morning. So there are basically 3 parts when you're working with sourdough, and it spans over roughly a 36-hour period. I like to break that 36 hours up over 3 days. So I will feed my starter always at nighttime, usually anywhere between 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. and then it will rise throughout the night so that when I wake up and I'm ready to work with it in the morning, it will have peaked or eaten all of the flour that I have fed it overnight. So part 1 is feeding your starter through the night. Part 2 is working with that starter to kind of make your dough the next day. That part is called bulk fermentation. It's roughly 12-hour window, but you're really only working with the dough for 1 or 2 hours of that time, and the rest is just sitting out on your counter. And then the third part is baking it. So after you are working with it and bulk fermenting it, then you're putting it in the fridge. I guess that's the third part. The fridge part is called cold proofing, and then that following morning, now the third day, you have your baking day. So I guess that technically would be 4 parts. So 4 parts: feed your starter, bulk fermentation, which is where you're making the dough, cold proofing, which is where you're just letting it rest in the fridge overnight. This again is day 2, and then day 3 you are baking your bread. So right now I'm going to be feeding my active starter, which again I'm now a little sketched out because I'm working with bleached flour, and I really I don't know, what's happening. But anyway, you're gonna take your starter and you're going to feed it. So again, this is made of flour and water, and how I do this is I like to use my little spatula, and you put your jar on your scale and you just tare it so that it's at 0 and you're working with grams. My recipe uses 90 grams of active starter, and I like to feed a ratio of 1 to 2. So 1 part starter and then 2 parts of my feeding ingredients, which are flour and water. I try not to have a whole lot of waste. So if I want 90 grams, and I typically will work with 25 or 30 grams to keep as a starter. So that's overall about 120 grams that I want to make in this jar, with a ratio of 1 to 2. So I probably will do 25 grams of starter, 50 grams of flour, 50 grams of water. So here is what that's gonna look like. And this is kind of what my consistency of my starter looks like. Oh, okay. So it actually probably is less than what you think it is. So here is what 25 grams of starter looks like, nice and small. And the rest of this is called discard, and you can put it in the fridge and save it, or you can throw it away, like what I'm doing. I prefer throwing it in the trash before I wash this cup out, just because my trash goes out relatively frequently, and I just like that better than throwing it in the sink. But I will go clean this pretty much immediately, because if it gets stuck around this rim, it's just really annoying to clean. Okay, so I just cleaned that. For the most part, there was still some hard stuff stuck in the center, so I'm just gonna let that soak. So now on our scale, you just tare it so that it goes back out to 0. And then I take my flour and I use just a clean, dry spoon for this. And I want roughly 50 grams of flour. This one is always a little bit more than I'm expecting it to be. So I like to go nice and slow. Okay, 54 grams, which is fine. Next is water. I'm gonna tare it out just because I don't care to do the math, even though it would add up to 100. And this always is much faster than I expect it to be, so I definitely try to go nice and slow for this one. If it makes you feel more comfortable, you could tear a different little container on here and pour 50 grams into that. So like you could tear something like this on here and pour 50 grams into a separate bowl first before pouring it in here. If you do pour too much, you can just put more flour in it, especially once you learn the consistency. The best advice that I got when I was first starting out was to find a recipe and just make that over and over and over again until you feel like you have a really good idea of what your starter is supposed to look like, what your dough is supposed to look like, what the bread is supposed to look like. And once you feel like you get a really good kind of understanding for what all that looks like, then you can start just experimenting a little bit. It's not supposed to be a difficult process. It's really forgiving. So some people are very accurate with their measurements, but really once you know kind of what you're looking for, the measurements matter for baking, but they don't really matter so much for feeding. So here's kind of what we got. It's kind of like hard and sticky. This is a wet starter. Some people will do dry starters where they basically do really high content flour and just a little bit of water, and then it's kind of like a dough ball, like even more dry maybe than Play-Doh, maybe not. But I like having a wet starter. Another good way of telling if it's a good ratio is if you can do this and it doesn't really fall out. So it's kind of like tenting a little bit, but it's not falling out. And that's it. So part 1 of feeding your starter is literally just getting the starter out of the jar and putting flour and water into it and then letting it sit. And I will show you, I'm gonna clean this. I'm gonna put it in the cup that I have that's soaking over here. But I will show you what this starter looks like, and it will at least double, but usually it triples since I kind of tripled the quantity. In size, the grams still stay the same, so it still will be a roughly 120 grams in the morning, but it will be a lot bigger. So this is what it's looking like tonight. If you can see kind of where it's at, I didn't really do a good job of cleaning up the sides of it. In the morning, hopefully it'll be like around here. So I'm gonna let this sit overnight, and we'll see you in roughly 12 hours. Okay, so it has been approximately 12 hours since we fed our sourdough starter last night, and it is day 2 for me. So it is the morning, and I will be starting step 2 of the baking bread process. So here's what we have. We have my sourdough, which despite being bleached flour, it grows. So we're gonna be using that. We got our scale, we got water and flour and salt. Bowl for our mixing, and then another container to hold our starter for what will be fed tonight. So let's get started. I'm going to tare this scale so that it is at 0. Here is what our starter is looking like. Oh yeah. So my recipe wants 90 grams of this active starter. It is very sticky. Okay, and if I do a little bit more, then I just scoop some out. 89.8. Then I will take this off and I will prep my container. I tear that on there to go to 0 so that I can have my starter in here. And it should be around 25 to 30, but let's see. 24.9. And because I measured it when I was feeding this starter last night so precisely, because I know exactly what I need, I pretty much have nothing left in here. If you do have things left in here, you can stick it in the fridge, and that gets called discard. And there are lots of different recipes. Discard just means it's the yeast is unactivated, so recipes that you use will still require yeast, but it will still have that kind of sourdough taste. So you can either put it in the fridge and use that discard, or you can throw it away, and I usually just throw it away. But now I have my starter that's ready to be fed for tonight, and you just kind of leave it on the counter until the end of the day. I have this 90 grams, and I will go wash these 2 things immediately, because again, when it dries on here, it's just really hard to wash. Okay, so now I'm gonna add my water. My recipe calls for 285 grams, which will be most of this water bottle. Again, if you're more comfortable, you can measure it in a separate container first, but I find measuring it into this big bowl, it's really easy. If I go over, I can just use a spoon or use a small little cup or something to get it out. So I went to 91. I will use just a little measuring cup. Let's see what I can find. I found a little shot glass, so I'm just gonna use that and just take a little bit out. And that's a lot easier to do in a big bowl like this than it is when you're mixing it in a small. So I got my 285 of water, and then I'm just going to mix this. 1 second while I go grab Victoria from the dog water bowls. Okay, you can probably see her back there. That little dot is she's just chilling back there while we're doing this. So while you're mixing this, it becomes kind of like this milky, frothy, kind of bubbly little mixture. And I basically just will rake this through and bring it up to the side and evaluate if there's any chunks left in it. Your water is supposed to be around room temperature when you're working with it, so I just kind of leave these either on the counter or in a cabinet. Okay, so as I'm raking this through, there's like a little bit of chunks in there, but it's for the most part dissolved in there. So I will put it back on my scale. I'll tare it. And now we've got flour. This again should be unbleached bread flour. Oh, Victoria's gonna play us some background music with her toy bells. My recipe calls for 400 grams of flour. And then whatever's left in my little container that I get out, I'll just put in my small container. And then remove from your bowl and whisk this. Some people will add the salt and the flour in one step. I saw a video that said salt and yeast don't really like each other, and so they suggested waiting a little bit before you add the salt. I've done it both ways. I don't think it changes the way that the dough tastes, but when you add the salt, it does kind of suck a little bit of the moisture out, so your dough is a little bit wetter, and I find that a little bit easier to work with when I'm doing stretch and folds. So I kind of like just waiting and adding the salt later. So once I'm done with this, I measure out my salt, and I typically wait like 10 minutes, and then I add it in, which I'll show you, obviously. Victoria is now here, opening up our cabinets. Hi. Hi. Okay, and I pretty much just mix until the big clumps of flour are gone. So your dough is like pretty shaggy and lumpy. And that's fine. That's just kind of how it looks at first. So I just kind of make sure everything's on there. And then I go wash this immediately. All right, so basically you just take a cloth and cover that up and just push it off to the side somewhere in your house for now. And I will measure my salt just because I like to be able to clean everything up. My recipe calls for 10 grams, so I will get 10 of that. Okay. And then I'm gonna come back and add this in 10 minutes. And in the meantime, this can be put away, this can be put away, my water bottles can be refilled, my flour can be put away, I don't need this container anymore, and everything else is still to be used. So we'll see you back in 10 minutes. Okay, it's been way longer than 10 minutes because I kind of forgot about it. But let's do our salt. I kind of just sprinkle half on and then I just dimple it in. Then I try and scrape it out and turn it over and do the same thing. We'll be back in another 10 to 30 minutes to do our first set of stretch and folds. Say bye. Okay, so we're ready for round 1 of stretch and folds. Sometimes I get little fuzzies in here from the dish towels. You can just pick them out. So here's kind of what we're looking with. Because I put the salt in later, it's a little bit like wetter and more moist than if you hadn't put the salt. If you put the salt in with the flour. But I like kind of working with it when it's a little bit wetter because then it's less sticky on my hands. So basically, you're just going around, like, if you just like put a plus mark in it, you're just going around 4 sides, pulling it up and folding it over on itself. So and while you're doing this, and while you were doing the salt, you can kind of feel the little lumps of the dough, and so I'm kind of like also just like pressing on those with my hand, and that kind of helps smooth it out. I think that was 4. You can really do as many as you want until you feel like it's thick. So this isn't really stretching a whole lot more, so that's probably the last one that I'll do. And then you just cover it back up and wait another 20 to 60 minutes. I try and do it at 30 minutes, but it doesn't always work that way. Here's what we're working with. See you back in another 30 minutes-ish. Okay, we're gonna do round 2 of stretch and folds. Here's what we're kind of looking like. I usually just do 2 rounds. Some people do 3. It's really whatever you want to do. But otherwise, that's everything that you do for this second phase of bulk fermenting. So I started making this around 9:30. It's now 11:30. So it took me around 2 hours. Again, add some time for probably like 20 minutes longer that I didn't put the salt in. But again, this process is very like forgiving. It doesn't have to be super regimented. So you just come and fold it whenever you can. And otherwise, I'm going to let it sit on the counter. Bulk fermentation kind of depends on the temperature of your house. My house is usually around 70 degrees. So my bulk fermentation happens for about 12 hours. So we started around 9:30 in the morning. Around 9 tonight or 10 tonight, I will shape it and then put it in my Banneton for the cold proofing. So it's just gonna sit here on the counter, and we'll be back at nighttime. All right, it has been around 12 hours since I started this process this morning, my bulk fermenting. So let's see what our dough's looking like. Ta-da! So you can see that it has definitely risen. It's usually a little jiggly. I think mine get a little bit dry on the top here, but I also don't like use a damp towel. It's just a dry towel. So I think next time I'm going to try a damp towel and see if that eliminates some of my dryness. And this is a step where people will use rice flour. So make sure that your surface is clean. And then some people will use rice flour to help it not stick to the surface as much. I don't like doing that because I haven't really had an issue. Like it is sticky, but and it leaves some residue on my surface, but it doesn't stick that badly. Like it's still very, I can work with it. So I don't like putting rice flour down because then it adds a little bit of a barrier when I'm trying to get the dough to stick to itself, and I just don't want to have those barriers. I do use rice flour on my banneton, and again, you can use just a normal bowl with a dish towel, but I will just kind of sprinkle some of that. And all of this kind of stuff that I have like this came in one kit from Amazon that was like 40 bucks. So it's not really an expensive hobby, unless you're baking every day and buying a ton of flour all the time, which I guess I was doing when we first started out. But you can get flour from Sam's Club or something like that. So basically you take your bowl and you just kind of flip it over, and you're supposed to just let it, the light is bad. You're supposed to just kind of let it come out naturally. I am not like the most patient for that. So I usually will just help it by just kind of swiping my finger along just the very top edges. And usually by the time I make it all the way around, it has pretty much, I don't even know if I do make it all the way around actually. See, it just like comes out. There's a lot of science behind all of these steps for why you're supposed to do things the way that you do. One guy that explains it really well is the Sourdough Journey on YouTube. I'll just always shout him out. I don't really pay that much attention to the science behind it. I will go soak this right away because some of it is wet and easy to work with, but some of it is already dry and crusty, and so I just like to soak everything. So again, this is pretty much the end of part 2. We are at 24 hours total now since we started this process yesterday. Bulk fermentation is done, and now we start the shaping and the cold proofing. So how most people shape their dough is just kind of stretch it as much as you can so that it's a rectangle, and my dry side is down, and it usually sticks to my counter much more than it's doing, but I like a little bit of sticking to the counter so that again I can shape it. So once you have kind of a rectangle, then you just fold it into thirds. So just take the long end and fold, and then the other end and fold it over, and so you have this kind of like burrito looking dough, and then you just kind of roll it on itself. And then from here we do push and pulls. But it was explained to me like a candy cane. Try to make a candy cane shape. I've noticed that I don't really like push it. I just kind of pull it, and I'm like just rotating and pulling. I think it's like relatively important that you go kind of slow, so you don't really want to be breaking the surface tension. So I just go kind of slow, and I try not to stretch it so much that it breaks the surface tension. If it has holes in it, like good, it's supposed to. If you can see little bubbles, those are the holes. So don't pop those. It's supposed to have those, that air in there. And I kind of just go until I feel like it's mostly a ball, a cohesive unit. I got one like really big air bubble right there. And then from there, you just kind of take it and you get your banneton and you like go upside down in it. And then you're supposed to kind of pinch this top part together so that the seam closes. Mine always just like opens up and flattens out, so I'm just like, whatever, I don't pay that much attention to it. And then you just cover it and you stick it in your fridge, and that starts the cold proofing. I don't know if there's a specific time, at least a few hours, I guess, to cold proof, but I really feel like you could cold proof it for 2 or 3 hours and then bake that. I've never actually tried that myself since I always just cold proof overnight, but if you didn't have a 36-hour, like 3-day window and you wanted to be baking it in a 26 26, 28-hour window, I'm sure that your cold proof could be a lot smaller time duration wise. But yeah, I do around 12 hours. So it's 9:30 in the morning, sometime around, anytime really between like 8 and 10, I'll be baking it. Only thing left for tonight is just putting my stuff away and feeding what we started this morning. I won't be making a dough, like a loaf, tomorrow, so I remember that I put like around 25 grams in there, and I still like more than a 1-to-1 ratio, so I might put like 30 or 40, but I'm not worried about making sure my feeder will be a specific quantity for a loaf making day. So that's it, and we'll stick this in the fridge, and we'll be back in the morning for baking. All right, good morning. We are at hour 36, day 3 of our sourdough journey, and we will be doing the last step today, which is bake day. So step one of this last step is to take your Dutch oven and put it in the oven. We want it to be in the oven while the oven is preheating. And this Dutch oven gets real hot, so when I use these mittens, I'm oftentimes doubling up a little bit because I think they're really hot. And then we will preheat our oven to 450 degrees. So we got our Dutch oven in there, nice and crusty. And then we will preheat to 450. All right, while that's preheating, I thought that I would show you my starter for what I just fed last night. So it is nice and bubbly. It's been eating for about 12 hours now. And when you're not working with your starter, you kind of just let it go. So it has risen. I don't know if it's going to be going up still or not. But basically by the end of the day today, it will be back down here, and that's how you'll know that it has eaten all of the flour and water that I put in there last night, and it is hungry and ready to be eaten again. So I will do the process of, in my new jar, glass cup, quantitying out however much I want for the next day, which I'm not really planning any loaves, so again, I'll keep it pretty small, anywhere between 10 and 20 grams, and you just keep on going. Okay, our oven has reached temperature, so we have pulled our loaf out of the fridge. I have this little silicone baking mat. Again, most of the stuff I got from one Amazon kit for like $40, roughly around there. I think the only thing I bought extra of was jars, because I like to use a different jar every time I feed my starter. Some people will just feed and discard out of the same jar. I like new jars because I find them really hard to clean, and so I just want to keep them clean. But anyway, so I got my silicone mat, I've got my dough, I've got my scorer. You don't need one of these. It will be in any kit that you find, pretty much. You can use a knife, but the knife has to be like really sharp. I've attempted using my dad's knives for these, and they don't even make a single slice. So the knife has to be sharp in order to score it. Basically, when you're scoring it, the bread, when it kind of rises and crusts and whatever in the oven, it will find a place to rip, and so you're just making your own rip. You're episiotomying the dough, essentially. Okay, so you just take it and you just flip it upside down. Boing. And here's what we have. I don't really do anything fancy with my cut. Just a simple little arc. Doesn't really have to be deep. That, I don't know, was like maybe this deep. Can be lighter, can be deeper. Victoria's currently making a break for the hallway and all the doors are open, so we'll make this choppy. There's our hot Dutch oven. Oh, you cannot see what I'm doing. I wonder if you can see Victoria down there. She's currently chewing on a pair of socks. Okay. Then we just place this in here. Cover it back up. And then the dough will cook covered for around 25 minutes. And then you will take the lid off and anywhere from like 13 to 20 minutes for uncovered. And that basically will just be how crusty and hard you want the outer layer to be. But we'll see you back in 25 minutes. Okay, now we leave for another like around 15 minutes. Okay, it is time to take our loaf out. Dun, 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 dun. And there you have it. So you're supposed to let it cool before you cut into it. I like it a little bit warmer, so I'll just leave it for like an hour or two, and then I'll just cut and enjoy. And there you have it, a nice crispy sourdough loaf. I'll take one final video when I cut it and show you what's called the crumb, where you basically just cut it down the middle and see how holy it is. So there's supposed to be holes in there. I don't know if it's like trapped air or something, but anyway, there we have it. There's our beautiful, wonderful, hard, crunchy loaf. Thanks for watching. Okay, so it has been a few hours, a little bit longer than I normally go, just because that's how our morning looked. But let's cut into this beauty and see what we're working with. Nice and crunchy still. There we have it. Here is our crumb. So I really like just having this with butter. You can also get like bread oils. We have a friend who makes their bread oil, and that was like really delicious the one time that we had it with them. We've tried making our own bread oil and it didn't work out, but if you can get really good at it, that is a really good option too. Or you can have it with jams like other toasts, or you can just eat it plain. But there you go, there's our loaf. I'm gonna butter this up and enjoy it. So thanks for baking with me, and I hope that you saw that this process was really not too hard and pretty easy, and once you get the hang of it, you really won't even think about what you're doing, you'll just do it. So happy baking. But just one last thing, you can always just put a bowl over your bread that you're not eating, or if it's all the way cold, you can put it in a plastic bag, but for that you definitely want to make sure it's cool, or else the condensation will help it grow mold in there. So now happy baking and happy eating.